All right, it looks like it's the top of the hour. So on behalf of the Shirt Resource Center team here at the University of Kentucky, I'll go ahead and welcome everyone to today's meeting. If you're joining us for the first time, our center is charged with supporting faculty, research administrative staff, and trainees at SURE R16 eligible institutions across the country. Our ongoing webinar series, like you're participating in today, represents just one of the support options we have available. So if you have a good experience today, we encourage you to check out our website and see about other ways you can engage with our center in the future. Today, we certainly welcome your questions for today's presenter. We would ask that you drop those in the Q&A box, but please note that we will hold those until the formal presentation concludes, at which point I'll share those with our presenter and give her a chance to respond. Please note that we are also recording today's session and we'll make that available through our YouTube channel. Please do give us a few business days to process and upload that recording, and you'll receive an email with a link to the session once it's made available. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Corinne Williams to the meeting. She serves at UK in several capacities, including as an associate professor in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society in our College of Public Health, as well as an associate vice president for student well-being. So we're delighted to have her with us to talk about student wellness strategies.
Thank you so much for having me today. And yes, in addition to these roles, in particular, I have been the Associate Vice President for Student Wellbeing for the past 4 years. Prior to that, I have served as an Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs. And then prior to that, I was our Director of Graduate Studies, which is meant for honestly, about the past 15 or so years, I have spent a lot of my time thinking about how do we support student wellness. In addition, I am a faculty member. I am in the classroom. I engage with students on an almost daily basis. And I have found that over time, I am one of the people who students seem to come to, honestly, as an informal support because I can help with some of these things. So nothing I'm going to say today is it necessarily groundbreaking. I think they're good reminders of how we need to take care of ourselves and others, and hopefully will give you some strategies for dealing with whatever is happening in your life, and particularly with the academic side. So with that, if I can make my slides go. I am going to focus on strategies for both mentors and students. Overwhelmingly, I have focused this on students, but recognizing that really these are strategies that work for generally people. And so I want to keep that in mind. I do have a few notes at the end specifically for mentors of things that I think we can do very intentionally to help support the students and trainees that are in our spheres. I'm going to offer a few key take-homes at the beginning just to keep in mind as we go through this. So the first one is, this is often easier said than done. Taking care of yourself is honestly kind of weirdly hard at times. And I say this as someone who has engaged in a lot of this work and is honestly in a period where I'm actively re-engaging some of this for myself, trying to make sure that I am taking care of myself to the best of my ability. The second one is you need to figure out what works for you. There's a lot of advice out there that other people will tell you. I, for years, was told that yoga was the best thing. I'm going to tell you, I absolutely hate yoga. It just doesn't work for me. It is like, I cannot handle the quiet, the stillness. I know there's other forms of yoga, but it took me a long time to realize that all of that advice, you have to pick and choose, just like with anything. Ultimately, you know yourself best. And so you have to figure out what works for you. And then finally, do not be afraid to ask for help. I'm going to come back to this time and again, but I think one of the challenges I see with people coming in is that we see asking for help as a weakness. And that's not the case. The other thing I would say for all of us is it's never too late to start. I have found with students that I'm mentoring, it is much easier if you can work on establishing some good habits early in your academic career, rather than trying to unlearn some negative behaviors. So with that, we'll jump in. And I'm starting with just a quick little background, particularly for the faculty on this faculty on this call, we know there has been a lot of increasing attention focused on student mental health and wellness. Our previous Surgeon General had really pushed campus leaders to ramp up support. There were a couple of reports that came out, particularly post-COVID. But one of the key things that happened when we recognized the challenges that the pandemic was creating with mental health was understanding that was actually just part of a trajectory. Mental health outcomes had started to change even before that. So I think this is something that it is clearly a timely topic. I think the other thing, and some of us in the audience may identify as neurodiverse, but for faculty and staff, we are increasingly seeing neurodiverse students moving up, engaging in undergraduate, graduate, doctoral level training. And these students do need different supports at times, and will just have different opportunities for engagement that I think are important. And I'm going to come back to this part, but we are seeing some pretty significant changes in our culture related to alcohol and other substance use. And in particular, one of the things that I do want to highlight that has become an interesting, I'm going to say challenge with respect to mental health is the legalization of marijuana and where then that, how that plays into student mental health on campuses and in other places. So, this is one of my favorite things to start a talk related to student wellness. So I think anyone who has flown on a plane has seen some form of this graphic and heard the flight attendant say, place the oxygen mask on yourself first before helping others who may need your assistance. And we say this because it's quite literally true that if you do not put on your oxygen mask first and you are without air, you will pass out and not be able to help put the mask on someone else who might need it. You quite literally have to put your mask on in order to be able to help others do that. That person who may need your assistant or that small child, having traveled with my nephews, I'm going to tell you, they could not figure out how to get their oxygen mask on me without, I don't know, they would need a lot of assistance. Others in the when we're talking about self-care, don't like this analogy because they say it's only for emergencies. And I honestly disagree. When we talk about putting your oxygen mask on first, I think about the things that you do every single day, you can do every single day to help take care of yourself. And if you want to show up and be your best self in the lab, in the classroom, wherever, you have to take care of yourself first. I think as humans, and I'm going to say Americans in particular, we struggle with this sometimes because it comes across as selfish. But in fact, it really is just you cannot be there for others if you don't take care of yourself first. And honestly, no one else is going to take care of you in the way that you need to. Once you are an adult, you no longer have, at least for most of us, we no longer have a parent or someone else saying, hey, make sure you eat your vegetables, make sure you go to bed on time, those kinds of things. We are responsible for ourselves, for better or worse. When I talk about caring for yourself, I'm going to start with some very basic elements. And I think and I'm going to talk to the students in particular here, but it's true for everyone. We sometimes forget these very basic things. Hygiene, regularly brushing our teeth, taking showers, washing our hair, those kinds of things. Having balanced nutrition, and I put in parentheses over time. I think we sometimes put a lot of pressure on ourselves to eat perfectly at every meal. Honestly, sometimes when you're stressed, going for whatever is going to keep you fed and going works. We'll talk a little about strategies to do this a little bit better, but so I say over time because 1 or 2 days of eating out of a vending machine is not going to kill you, but we want to be mindful of that over time. Drinking your water, and I truly mean water or other non-carbonated liquids that will hydrate you rather than dehydrate you. There's a lot of controversy in this. Some people include caffeinated beverages. I personally do not, but that's a whole other thing for me. But by the time, and I have this argument all the time, by the time you really feel thirsty, you are bordering on dehydration. So you need to make sure you are proactively drinking water. People make fun of me because it's funny because I actually have 3 bottles of water and 3 glass bottles of water in front of me at this moment. Drinking water on a regular basis is really important. A lot of the physical problems we feel can be solved by drinking water. I think this is something that honestly younger people are better at than older people, but there you go. And then physical activity. I don't necessarily mean exercise. We have more and more seen in the literature that getting up and moving, rather than sitting in your chair, or even just standing in one spot, is so important. Getting up and going for regular walks. There's a reason why all of our smartwatches remind us on the hour to get up and get a few more steps in, if you happen to have one of those devices. So whatever that looks like for you, but it is a key part of overall taking care of yourself. And then sleep. And this is another one I'm going to come back to. College students do not sleep enough. That's true for undergrad, graduate, anyone sort of in that higher education space. And thinking about how we can actually improve our sleep, but also the importance of sleep. I'll talk a little bit later about all-nighters, but I think this is a critical piece of understanding how do we get good sleep and good sleep on a regular basis. I'm going to transition to just talking about a few ways that you can cope with stress. I am going to give this list, and I want to come back to that advice of you have to think about what works for you. First on this list for me is unplugging for a bit. And this means quite literally putting my phone in airplane mode, and not allowing any communication. Now, sometimes that is not possible for different circumstances, and sometimes I can only do it for 5 minutes, but it is important to take breaks. I could have given an entire talk about the impact of social media on mental health, but I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of is how, for the most part, people only put positive things on their social media. So we are inundated with all of these like great, fun things that other people are doing, and it can sometimes make us feel depressed. So taking a step back, taking a step away is really important. We know laughter, they say literally laughter is the best medicine. Whatever that is for you. Exercise and physical activity is on here also as a way of coping with stress. Going for a quick walk can really help with some of the physical anxiety that can come when you are stressed. Meditation, prayer, or whatever sort of mindfulness activity is there. Gardening is one, and really I've sort of put that in with like being out in nature. Many years ago, I worked with someone who encouraged me to be outside without headphones on. And it is fascinating to take 5 minutes and go outside and listen to what sounds you can hear. I happen to be in Kentucky. We have a ton of birds around at various points in the year. Going outside and just listening. Spending time with pets, other things like that. Getting a massage. I will say this is another one that people always suggest to me. And I absolutely detest massages. I just don't like being touched. So again, take it for what it means to you. Visualization. So imagining yourself on a beach, quiet meadow, etc. One of the things that I do when I travel is I will take 30-second or 1-minute videos of places that I find enjoyable. So it could be that I am, when I was in Chicago, we went to a restaurant at the top of the city and I just loved the way the lights looked. So I took a 30-second video. And then when I need a minute, I'm not good at visualizing, to be clear. When I need a minute, I will play one of these. I do the same thing with water, beaches. I have a ridiculous amount of minutes of just waves coming and hitting the beach, and I really appreciate that. Listening to music. I will say naps are simply lying down. One of my 1-minute strategies when I'm having a rough day at the office in particular is I will close my door and I just put my head on my desk for about 30 seconds. And there's something about closing my eyes and just breathing and taking a minute that's important. For those of you who are creatively inclined, engaging in one of those endeavors, writing, drawing, painting, whatever it is, may also be a good way. One of the things that I encourage everyone to think about with their well-being is this intersection between well-being and time management. Almost always I have found when I am struggling with my um, wellness and engaging in the activities that I know I need to engage in, it comes down to a period of overwhelm where a lot is happening at once. And so one of the things that I've started talking with students about is how to manage some of this. Um, and in order to do this well, and again, this comes back to you have to tailor these strategies to yourself. You need to know yourself and what I've come to refer to, and there probably is an academic term, but I've honestly not taken a minute to do that, what I consider your productivity cycle. When are you at your best? And then when are you not? I am very solidly a morning person. If you ask me to complete a complex task at 9 o'clock at night, even though I'm a highly functional adult and at like 6 a.m., I could do it in probably like 2 minutes, at 9 o'clock, I am not my best. What I've learned is there are some things that are out of your control, right? Classes get scheduled at a certain time. We have lab meetings at a certain time. Put those fixed things in your calendar and then plan a rough outline of all of the other things you have to do. And I've given some examples, including some things that people don't always think of here. So, time for email management. I try not to have my email I try not to, let me say, I try not to respond to emails all day. I will watch them to see if something time sensitive comes in, but if it's not truly time sensitive, I won't stop what I'm doing to shift to that. I've included meals, and in that I mean like meal prep, all of the things, laundry. Life takes time. And I think one of the things we sometimes fail to consider is how much time actually doing life, particularly for our younger students who may be on their own for the first time or are still figuring things out. That first move into an apartment where you are like truly responsible for all of the things can be a little overwhelming. So I say, try to put all of these things in and match it to what amount of energy or mental energy do you need for the task. So because I'm a morning person, I do my laundry at night. I try to throw a load in before bed and then I might fold it in the morning. I often not. It'll wait until the next night. That's probably not the best practice, but it's how I make my life work. I do my writing first thing in the morning. I often actually work at home, and I will write from about 6 in the morning until about 9, and then I come into the office. Now, that's a luxury that I have, and I've blocked my calendar, so rarely do I have to be on campus before then, but it helps. It's when I am at my best, and it's when I can get things done. Unless a student absolutely has a conflict and can't make it work, I only meet with students in the late afternoon. Because in that 3 to 5 period, I tend to get a little bit of a mental lag and I'm just not quite as good. This is also the time when I will do some of the things like writing a cover letter for a manuscript or things that require like a little bit less of my mental energy. So I encourage you to think through that. I'm also going to highlight here that I have bolded fun things. It is important to do fun things and actually sometimes plan time for them as you get busier and busier. Remembering that you as a human being need to do those fun things is important. I will tell you right now, if you were to look at my calendar, you would also see that I have lunch as an automatic recurring appointment on every day. There was a period where I was not really good and I was getting scheduled, and I was in meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And I was not having time for lunch. For students who have classes back to back, trying to figure out when are you going to eat, or planning ahead so you bring food to a class if that's okay, is important. So I hope this makes sense and I'm happy to come back to that if needed. But I think really this is a place where you need to know yourself and what will work best for you. I said this a minute ago, but it is worth repeating. And I strongly encourage everyone to do something fun every single day. And I do mean every single day, even if it's just 5 minutes. I worked with a student a couple of years ago, a graduate student who was really struggling. And one of the things we talked about was she felt like she was just working 24/7. And when I talked to her, she was basically working or sleeping. She had nothing that she considered fun in her life. And so I asked her, what do you like to do? And we talked through some strategies and some ideas of something that really could be done in for just a couple of minutes to give you that sense of um, just pleasure and fun and honestly giving your mind a break. Part of this is these fun things activate different parts of our brain. And so really do let us become more engaged in other things. For anyone who's ever had writer's block and like just force themselves to sit and stare at a screen, um, I think we've all learned that you really do have to just take a step away and do something very different. And so these fun things are that. I actually started a challenge, and it's now been about 2.5 years of reading for at least 5 minutes every day. I read on my Kindle, so it actually tracks. I will admit I have missed two days in the past 2.5 years, but only two, which honestly feels pretty good. I'm going to admit one of them was because I went to see Taylor Swift and the day just got away from me. And then the other one, I was hanging out with my nephews. So both of those feel like okay reasons for having missed. But that taking that time has become really critical to my day. And actually, I try to start my day reading for 5 minutes just because it gives me a sense of if I do nothing else today, I will have done something that makes me happy. Denying these things in favor of work will lead to burnout. We need to take the time and spend the time having fun and remembering why. And this could also just be grabbing a coffee with a friend, going for a walk with someone. I will occasionally take my lunch outside and sit. It doesn't have to be a big thing, just a little thing that is for yourself and makes you happy. I want to talk briefly about some of the harmful myths because these have become, in my tenure as a faculty member and administrator focused on well-being, have become honestly some of my pet peeves. So I hear this a lot. All-nighters are a normal part of the college experience. I think everyone at some point in time has probably attempted an all-nighter. In reality, what we know about how people learn and retain information is an all-nighter is not the way to go. You are so much better off to study and prepare what you can and then get a reasonable night's sleep. It might not be a full 8 hours good night's sleep, but you will be much more able to recall the information that you have studied or heard if you are well rested. Your ability to retain information after a certain point in time, your brain is quite literally too tired to remember things. So you are again better off going to sleep. I tell all of our students at incoming orientations this. I know it is still a thing. And honestly, now it's a little bit problematic because people will use various substances to try to keep themselves awake, which just exacerbates the problems. And honestly, you do not, you are not able to retain that knowledge in the way you think you are. My second big myth, and this is important in this sort of sphere when we're talking about mental health and wellness, is talking about suicide. If you are concerned about suicide, a lot of people say, well, this is, if I mention the word, it's going to give them the idea. And we know 100% that is not true. If someone is thinking about suicide, it's already, they're thinking about it. Talking about and actually putting it on the table and asking very direct questions is in fact one of the best prevention strategies we know related to suicide. A few years ago, I had a friend whose partner had passed away unexpectedly, and we were really concerned about him. And so we just had the conversation. And then I talked to all of his friends, other friends, about other things that we should watch for as we were just making sure that he was okay in those first couple of days. It is important sometimes to just ask the question and try to keep other people as safe as possible. And sorry, I'm like, I should have reordered these. And then this one is one that I hear a lot, particularly from junior faculty, but graduate students as well. I actually had a graduate student in my office not 2 weeks ago where we were talking about this, where he had assigned himself writing days and was like, the writing days are the only way to get things done. And what we know about how much time you can spend in that process of writing particularly scientific writing that tends to require a lot more careful thought. We're referencing things, we're synthesizing a lot of information. Your brain can only stay in that sort of high functioning spot for so long. Um, and so this idea of writing days, now sometimes your schedule may only allow for writing on particular days or like a full day kind of a thing. But we really need to think about how you can break tasks up, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. How we can talk about breaking those tasks up. Forcing yourself to sit at the computer all day goes against a lot of what we as humans need. I've already talked about the needing to get up and having that regular physical activity. Staying seated all day is not healthy, but also being able to engage our brain in different ways is important. So forcing yourself to just sit and do one thing all day is not super helpful. I mentioned just a couple of writing strategies. This is one of the things, and why I included the slide is when I talk to, and this is overwhelmingly graduate students, but I'm starting to see it more with our upper level undergraduate students as well, is that they struggle with writing. And I think this is something that we all struggle with. I will tell you that as a junior faculty member, I made it about 3 years before I started to really struggle with how to balance all of the things and get everything done. And then I started talking to people, and particularly talking to my mentors, about how they manage two things in particular. One was email, because email is just never ending. And so trying to figure out how you get on top of that and manage that was important. And then number two, how they manage their writing. And I started asking every quote unquote successful person that I knew how they manage these two tasks. And this is what has turned out to work well for a majority of people. It lines up with a lot of what we know about how we write, particularly that scientific writing. And so I constantly am sharing these strategies. So three big things that I try to encourage every student or every person to think about. One is engaging in the Pomodoro technique. This is quite literally, you write for 25 minutes, focused writing, you close your email, you just have your document up or whatever you need to write for that writing task. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, and you quite literally set a timer, you take a 5-minute break. Often this is like you get up, you go for a quick walk up. I walk up and down the hall in my building, get some water is something I always add in there, and then you come back to it. Part of this is about building positive feelings about your writing. Part of it is also letting you take breaks. Best practices are to include a goal for that, what you're going to write in that 25 minutes, and ending on a positive note. So you try not to let yourself get stuck. Next is breaking tasks up into smaller pieces. And part of that is knowing that there's lots of pieces of writing that we have to do. And so I've started connecting this with the energy idea. So there are times, for example, when we might be working on formatting references, or I have a particular area that I'm working on and I'm realizing that I'm missing a couple of citations, or there's a sort of a gap and I might have to go and find an article. I try to do some of those tasks when I'm a little more tired. Those would be for me late afternoon tasks. Whereas at the point at which I have gotten all of my literature together, I'm sitting here with 10 articles and I'm trying to write a very coherent introductory paragraph. That's an early morning task. That's the thing I write at 6 o'clock in the morning. That works for me, to be clear, because that aligns with my productivity cycle and my energy cycle. But other people I know write those intro paragraphs at 10 o'clock at night. And that is their prime time. It's a little bit challenging. I will say one of my key collaborators, we are complete opposites. And so we are constantly, she will send me something at 2 o'clock in the morning that I will then edit and send back to her, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And it just works for us. And then I always encourage students and people, if you get stuck, consider writing in a different way. We have lost writing on paper, and there's something about actually sketching out your notes that can be really helpful. You can also think about dictating it and having, and then writing from your listening to the recording, and or discussing with a friend and a colleague and either having them type for you or recording that conversation so you can get your ideas out and then get them on paper. I had a student, it's actually now been about 10 years ago, who was coming back to finish her master's degree and was really, really struggling with being a returning student and trying to figure this out. Had at that point then had a husband and two young kids and was just really struggling. And she um I asked her about her husband and he was very supportive of her. And I was like, would he be willing to help you with this? And quite literally, she wrote most of her master's thesis by talking about it with her husband and having him typing up their notes. And then she would go and she would edit it and make it coherent, but um, it gave them actually something to do together. He felt like he was really helping her, and it led to A, her finishing, and B, them feeling a little bit more connected about this, where it wasn't something that she was doing separate from him. Now, not everyone has a person in their life that they can do that with, but almost always we have a friend or a colleague who's willing to sit down and have a conversation with us and sort of engage in that for 30 minutes or an hour. Um, I said this earlier and I'm going to say it again. Um, Ask for help. I'm going to jump to the last one, but ask for help uh, even before, or maybe when you just start feeling like things are getting out of control. A lot of times I see people wait too long. Not to say that help can't be given then, but often if you had asked earlier, um, there's more opportunities and more things we can do. We know that humans are social communal animals. We depend on others for all sorts of things. I'm betting there are very few, if any, people on this call who, for example, grow all of their own food. Most of us depend on city services for things like water and garbage. Um, we depend on others for all sorts of things, and yet we often see asking for help when we are struggling with our mental health and well-being in particular as a sign of weakness. I want to be crystal clear. It is not a sign of weakness. It is just acknowledging that sometimes other people may have answers or may have a perspective that we don't have, that we can benefit from. I also always encourage, and this is many more people are saying this now, but if you got into a car accident and hit your head, you would not think twice about going to the emergency room for help. Maybe very few of us would. It is important that we sometimes seek help from those who have expertise. I'm going to give a quick example of where early intervention can really help and why it's important. And this is a different than a mental health example, but my when I got my doctorate, the plan was I was moving from Boston to Washington, D.C., and my mom and aunt were going to come and help me, which they had done. They had helped me move many times. It was a thing that sort of the three of us did. And the plan was we were going to explore D.C. and like have a week together, and it was going to be great. And when we were in Boston packing up, I noticed that my aunt didn't seem like herself. I couldn't like pinpoint it, but I asked her, I was like, are you okay? And she told me that she thought she had a UTI. And we were in Boston. She was in Arizona. She lived in Arizona at the time. So she was traveling and she said she didn't want to like bother anyone. She didn't want to go to urgent care. She didn't want to go to the emergency department. She was just going to wait until she got home, which was like, I'm going to be serious, 10 days later, which not the best idea. At the time, I was working with a bunch of doctors, including internal medicine physicians. And I was like, I have like 12 friends who would probably be happy to like do a quick consult and offer you, see what we could do, get you in quickly. Like my job was right literally across the street from the Brigham and Women's emergency department. In Boston, I knew exactly how to get help and what to do. My aunt declined. We go to DC. This is a city I've never lived in. I don't know anyone. My aunt honestly gets worse and worse. We end up the day she's supposed to fly out. My mom says she can't fly. We have to take her to the emergency room. At this point, she is beyond, she can't deny us. I don't know where a hospital is. So now I go out to the front desk person at my apartment building and trying to not panic him, say, I need to know where the closest ER is. We get the information. Because I've never driven to the ER, get lost along the way. It becomes a whole ordeal. By the time we get to the ER, get her checked in, all of that, she was septic. And the doctor said if we had not taken her then, she probably would not have survived the flight home. I say all this to say people, right? A UTI, a urinary tract infection, is easily treatable with antibiotics if you do it early. She, it turns out, was going to be the first of now 3 people in my life who've ended up hospitalized um, because of UTIs, because they didn't want to ask for help. They were sort of like, we'll wait and see, those kinds of things. And I just say that, I tell that story and I tell it to all of my public health students now as a way of that early, right? Getting those antibiotics early, much simpler than in all cases. Actually, one of them passed away, but because of the UTI. The other 2 were in the hospital for at least 5 days. Very different trajectories. So ask for help and ask for help earlier rather than later. Missing a deadline, ask for the extension. Talk to your people. Now, some deadlines are just deadlines. As someone who submits NIH grants, it just is, right? But there's always another one. If you can't submit in February, you submit in June. And your mental health and your well-being are not necessarily worth pushing that. One of the things that I think is important, and this is true for both students and faculty on this webinar, a lot, as I mentioned earlier, there was this really big conversation around mental health sort of post-pandemic. Many universities have increasing options for student mental health services. It's important, even if you have been a student at your university for a while or faculty at your university for a while, explore what your university has. There might have been changes. A couple of years ago, we partnered with Talkspace to provide direct access to online therapy. It's been revolutionary in terms of reducing barriers for our students. And a lot of universities are partnering with similar type services. So it's worth seeing what your university has and what options are available to you. I'm going to switch just briefly to talk to the more of the mentors, our faculty, and honestly to those who are aspiring to be mentors one day. So I ask for all of my faculty in the audience, number one is think about how you and really try to be more proactive with modeling healthy behaviors. I think this is something that we tend to do a fair bit of do as I say, not as I do. And I think actually modeling those healthy behaviors, but also talking to students about why you do what you do is important. So I tell my students that when I offer them meeting times, if they come back and say, can I meet with you at 9 o'clock? I ask, does it really have to be 9 o'clock? And I give a little bit of an explanation for why I would prefer to meet with them later. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does. But I think modeling those healthy behaviors is important. I talk about having, drinking water regularly, booking the time for lunch, actually sometimes stepping away from my desk for lunch. That one I'm still really working on. Those things people around you see, and they can really help others to feel like they have permission to do these things to take care of themselves. I talk a lot about visiting my family because that's something that makes me happy and making that work. Those things are important, and my students tend to appreciate when I share that. I also encourage you to talk both about your successes and your challenges. Students only see the sort of final product of you as a successful researcher. Talking about the process and your path along the way and where there were both successes, challenges, things you wish you had done differently is important. I say normalize failure and setbacks as part of the process. Given the audience for this, a lot of us are part of research projects. Quite literally, failure or setbacks or rethinking our hypotheses is part of the scientific process. In the same way, we should think about this as part of our life. Successes and challenges are all normal. We've all had things that have not gone exactly how we thought they should go. When talking to students, I would also encourage you to remember that one size doesn't fit all, and that all of our students may need different things. And depending on their personality, I earlier talked about neurodiverse students. They may need different advice and different strategies for being successful than you did. I was very careful with how I phrased this because I think there's a lot of sort of back in my day, but I think it's just important that we all acknowledge that today's students have grown up differently and in a different world than the one that we did. Access to technology has lots of great benefits. There are some consequences. I think, when we look at substances that are available, it's very different. I was recently having a conversation with the number of adult women who are being diagnosed with ADHD many years past when traditionally students are now. Things are different, and we have to acknowledge that. Um, and then this one is a little bit trickier, but be open to, and I would actually encourage you to initiate conversations about how your students are doing. A lot of us will do progress check-ins related to research. I try always, and sometimes the students at this point just know and will volunteer, but I try to, if the student is sort of hedging around something, I will ask them openly about how they are doing and are they feeling okay? And are there things that I might be able to help them manage better? Now, those are sometimes tough conversations to have, and sometimes it leads to things that you may not feel as comfortable talking about. So I would encourage you, in the same way that I talked about some of the resources at universities, know what your university offers and who you can refer students to. Um, I benefit now from having been the associate vice president for student well-being, in that I know a lot more about all of these resources. But I guarantee you there is probably someone on your campus or in your college who has student affairs and this sort of specific work in their job description. I had multiple conversations with students where I said, quite literally, we have 400 people at the University of Kentucky who belong to the Office for Student Success, whose sole job is, or at least part of their job, is to help students be successful on campuses. So I think being open to initiating these conversations is important. I had one other thing I was going to say about that, and I've already forgotten it, so I might come back to it. But I think when we are thinking about how do we support students, this is a critical piece of understanding both that they are living in a different world. And if we start that conversation, you should be prepared to help them and sort of follow up with it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So the other thing about this, where I said that I will sometimes bring things up, is as you work with students, you get to know them and you know their body language and you know their mannerisms. If something feels off, something is probably off. And I often say, like, I don't always know what is going wrong, and I don't need to know, but I do tell my students, like, I would like to engage in a conversation if something is going wrong. So I say, I don't always need to know the what, I need to know that something is going wrong. And I tell students they don't have to share with me, partly because I'm a mandatory reporter. Some things, there are consequences if they share with me. But being open to those conversations and engaging and just saying, you don't have to tell me exactly what's going on, but I want to help support you. I had a student who was always sat in the front row, super engaged, answered questions, made eye contact when we would meet in my office, was really good at the eye contact, was always a little bubbly. And one day she was just not, is what I'm going to say. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. She didn't answer a single question in class. When I talked to her afterwards, we just had standing meetings after class. When I talked to her after class, she was just different. And I let her walk out of the room because I had sort of prompted a little bit and she didn't seem like she wanted to share. And I let her walk out of the room, and then like an hour later, I regretted it. And I sent her an email and I said, you don't have to tell me what's going on, but you seem different today. And I want you to know if there's anything I can do to help, I will, or try to get you connected to whomever might be able to help. And she came back, and actually it turned out that she had had an issue with the prescription, had gone off her meds. It was a whole thing, but she was getting the help she needed. But she appreciated me asking. And she didn't sort of jump on any of my questions because she had taken care of it. She was just going through that period of getting back on her meds. But she appreciated that I asked. So I have never had a student who did not appreciate that I asked, to be clear. I'm going to wrap up with Two final things. Number one are things for all of us to consider. And I realize I'm very close on my time. So, am I doing anything that may send a different message than I mean to? So I try very hard to say that I support the well-being of individuals around me. And then I think about ways that I might not be doing this. And one of the things that I found myself doing was I was often emailing this has become my personal pet peeve. I was often emailing on the weekends or evenings. And I realized then my staff thought they should be checking their email all of the time, or they felt the need to respond immediately. And so I had a conversation with my whole team and said, I will occasionally send emails on the weekend or evenings. It's about how I manage my time. And that's probably because I was off one afternoon where I didn't actually take the time off and I'm making it up on the weekend or something like that. Or I was traveling. And so I just happened to be on an airplane, which many of us write a lot of emails on airplanes. The Wi-Fi on airplanes is amazing. I always tell people, consider adding a disclaimer to your signature, adding a disclaimer to the email, or using delay send. Scheduled send is great and can really let you do work whenever it works for you, but send during business hours. And then for one of the other things for us to think about is, am I planning ahead for when things will get more difficult? I talk to students a lot about how are they prepping for midterms, finals, exams, or at least coming up with some helpful strategies. So I will throw out one of the things that I do is I keep frozen veggies in my freezer at all times. Now, I'm going to be honest, this is not the most glamorous dinner, but frozen veggies and scrambled eggs covers most of your nutritional needs, can be cooked in 5 minutes, and will get you through. That's become one of my strategies. I keep actually a fair bit of stuff in the freezer for these kind of moments, but we all know that at some point things are going to get challenging. And so you have to think about, am I preparing in advance as best I can for when that happens? And then the final thing that I'll wrap up on, and this is homework for everyone, is I want you to take some time after this presentation to come up with something you can do in 1 minute to make yourself feel better. I was talking about this with a friend of mine over the weekend. She keeps a folder on her phone of pictures of cute babies and like babies laughing. And so when she needs something, she just looks at it for like 30 seconds, a minute, and she feels better. Come up with something you can do in 5 minutes to make yourself feel better. I have a playlist of songs I love. I give myself one song and I walk around the building until that song is over. And I will tell you, I have let people in my world know, if you see me walking around the building, don't interrupt, like I'm doing a thing. And then something you can do in 15 minutes to make yourself feel better. Having these strategies up front becomes really important so that when you're in a place where you are struggling, you don't have to try to come up with it. And then the last thing I'll say is decide if there's anything you are currently doing that doesn't serve you well. I mentioned that for years I was trying to do yoga. I would literally wake up at 5:30 and try to do like a yoga tape at home. And then finally my therapist was like, why? I was like, because I'm supposed to. She's like, but you've set that for yourself. So take a minute and walk through, is there anything that you were currently doing that doesn't serve you well? And think about how you can revisit and maybe reestablish some better patterns, habits, whatever you want to call them. And with that, I will end and take questions. Sorry.
Great. Thanks so much, Corinne. We have one question in the chat right now, but we certainly welcome other folks to populate a few more in there. We'll answer as many as we can until 3. First question asks, what if you ask for help from your PI and they are not exactly responsive to your need for help or support?
Yeah. It's funny because this is actually how I have gotten 2 of the mentees that I currently have, where they reached out. I will say, and I think we can share this resource, but there's different things about who your mentoring team needs to include. And I would say one of the pieces with that is think about what other faculty you can engage with that might meet different ones of your needs. I'm going to tell you, my PI when I was in graduate school was probably the last person I would have gone to when I was struggling. Now, I will say the second person on my committee who ultimately became really key, I went to her with no problem. It took a while for that relationship to get established, but that is one thing that I was are there other people in your world, we also have a group on campus, and one of the things that we've started leveraging is mentors who then can have sort of an informal conversation with the PI and sort of talk about what that student might needs. And I will say to all of the PIs and faculty mentors, it's really important to think about how you react to students in this way. And it's okay if you do not feel comfortable having the conversation, but you need to have plans for that and think about how to support those students.
Okay. There are a lot of thank yous in the chat. So for everyone commenting, we really appreciate your comments there.
If anyone, I left it up only briefly, but I'm super easy to find on UK's website with just my name and UKY. But if anyone wants to email me, I'll send you the slides. I know you don't typically share them, but I'm happy to share them.
Great, appreciate that.
Yeah. Melissa, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thanks. Thanks, Corinne. That was great. So I guess one thing came to my mind is, sometimes I've worked with students that, they failed the qualifying exam or, some sort of moment. And I know that, within a week or two, they're going to get over how they're feeling. But I also know that it takes time. But, there's that period right after you get some bad news where you're really down in the dumps. How can you help students sort of to sort of not let those negative thoughts just overwhelm you, for that window of time until you sort of sort things out?
Yeah. So I think two things. Number one, if you have normalized talking about failures up to that point, I think that can help a little bit because then you are able to better remind students in that moment. So you remember the story I told you 6 months ago about when this thing for me didn't go well? Here, this is your moment that's like that. And 20 years from now, when you've made it through, you're going to be able to look back on this and it will just have been a bump in the road that you made it through. So I think part of that for me is which is where it's important to normalize those all along so you have them to draw from in those tough moments. I think the other thing that I have said to students, and this is sometimes, I think students sometimes might not know what to do with me. I sort of ask and say, what do you need in this moment? Do you need a minute to wallow or do you want us to come up with a plan? And sometimes students want the day or two to wallow, and that's okay. And then it's about making sure that they are safe and they have, friends, they have plans, etc. And sometimes students really do need someone just to say, we can make a plan. Let's come up with what you're going to do. And I have been on a handful of student committees where we failed them. It is horrible for the student. It is not much more fun for the faculty. For all the students who are out there, I'm just going to say, we struggle with that. Not as much as you, but we struggle with that. And so being able to sort of talk about what next steps look like and really, what I have learned is that immediately after they get that, they're not ready to hear it. Sending an email the next morning that says, hey, I know you're still processing this. We can work on a plan that will keep you on your trajectory, keep you successful. Let's have that conversation when you're ready.
Right. Yeah. It's a challenging time for sure.
Next question asks, how can failures be normalized for students without making them feel like it means they will fail and they need to prepare, as they can be a bit demoralizing?
I think this is where it is really important to talk about it from the beginning. I think too often, and I have been guilty of this in the past, to be clear, I think too often we wait until a student isn't doing well to start these conversations. And if you start talking to a student about failure when they're not doing well, versus if they know that that is just part of what you talk about with students and it doesn't actually mean anything, that you have the same conversation with a student who you are certain is going to pass as you do with a student who you're maybe kind of questioning or think might need a little more time. The more you can normalize that as just part of your regular thing. And it feels weird to say that, like, it almost is in a first conversation when you're walking through like that first meeting with the student and talking about your background. talking about different things that have gone not so well. I had to change advisors at one point. I actually changed majors like halfway through college. Like I have all sorts of weird things that I did along the way that just say like your path is not necessarily linear. And talking about that from the jump, from the minute you start meeting with a student is, I think, really important. I think also making it clear that none of this means they are going to fail, but it's just the nature of life that it might happen and you want them to be prepared. I don't, we put life vests on boats, not because we think they're going to sink, but on the off chance that it does sink, we want to be prepared. It helps a little bit in my field. So we're public health. I do a lot of prevention work. So we are all about being prepared. So I try to talk about it through that lens of like, we do like you put on your seatbelt. You don't expect to get into a car accident. You just put on your seatbelt every day, just in case.
All
I
right.
could also give you probably like 100 of these analogies.
Always helpful. Well, that's the last question that we have in the chat. So I would like to extend a big thank you for today's presentation. It was really excellent. And we hope to see folks on the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.